You're now watching two old farts making noises. Welcome to Canadian Art Today with your host, Paul Constable.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good. The sun came up,
Sun
and
came, sun came up. We're all alive. It's a good day.
we're still doing okay. Got a little rain, so we're a little happy. We're trying to put those smoky fires out. Good.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, you have some special people lined up the next couple of weeks, I've noticed. So this is going to be an exciting show today and next week.
Yes, we have a very special artist. She's a multidisciplinary artist working in, even a little bit of editing and film and video. She's a mixed media.
Wow.
And she's going to be in our next two shows back to back, so with 2 weeks in a row. So
Nice.
we'll just show what she does, and it's you'll see the transition between her day life, what she works in, and then she gets into collaborative issues with other artists, and
Right.
she creates these crazy things we'll call crankies. So we're
Nice.
just prime that for in 2 weeks. We'll see that one, but we'll get an interview with her for that. But for this one, she's just show some of the stuff and how she works. She's been a curator, a director of public gallery in North Battleford for a number of years, and she now works independently. And she's working with kids programs in LGBTQ
Wow.
and helping them. Everybody, like, she's a real orchestrator of community, and she's an asset like you wouldn't believe for kids and young adults, and that for mental health as well. So I'd like to welcome Holly Hildebrand, please.
And there she is, everybody.
Yes, yeah.
Well, Holly, it's a pleasure. I'm going to let you and Paul do your thing. I've already done my thing. My job is to sit here and look good. I've completed my task, and now I can leave. And I will see you at the end of the show. Enjoy your show. I look forward to seeing your art.
You bet.
Thanks.
Have a great day, guys. Cheers.
There we go. It all works good. How are you doing this morning?
Yeah. I think I'm okay. I'm a little bit nervous, and now you've said all that stuff about me. It's kind of like, ah!
There's only millions of people out there watching us.
Yeah, right.
Maybe one day, but it's good. Hey, we're gonna rock the world with some of your stuff today, because I think I've always really I've actually seen you go through the process of some of this stuff, and it's chaotic. I guess I'll call it chaotic. It's fun to watch you because you're usually dancing around and you're prancing. You've got cardboard going and mixed media, and I've been at some of retreats with you as well. And it's just you're a fun person to be around, and I really enjoy that aspect of you sharing so much with so many people, and in your community of children and educational. I guess it's the educational aspects of your work, right? It's and we'll talk about that. We're going to just talk about the understanding of how art is part of mental health, and why we should all do this a little bit, and we should all be a part of this. And a lot of times we do it and we don't know that we are actually helping ourselves while we do it, because it's sort of like journaling. So today I guess that's what we're going to talk a little bit about, is how do you gather this information together and make sense of, we talked about this string that holds what you did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Does the string loop around and come back to where you started it, right? And you say, oh, I need to make another string around that string and another one. So you're weaving your past knowledge, and it becomes your present knowledge. And hopefully at the end you have a really long string. I think that's all we can really hope for. And we're gonna start with a slide. There we go. I love to see your workspace. This is it. There you are. Sorry about your spelling of your name. That ND should have been stuck on the end. It happens to me regularly, so I got to figure this out. But anyway, that's pretty funny, actually. But I'm going, okay, we do what we can do.
I think it does kind of work for me, because everything I do is kind of fragmented all over the place. It's always made up of a bunch of different things together. So, hey, if my name kind of gets disjointed, it fits right in.
Well, I don't know. It's just it's happened to me a number of times. So I got to figure this out. Why names? I made it smaller and everything to get it to fit in, but there's a squeezy program on this thing that squeezes everything up. But we won't talk about that. That's just a production issue. So we've got. I love the space. I mean, I've been to this space outside, and it's it's open and friendly. And can you tell us a little bit about? I guess just tell about your practice and what you're doing. What do you do out in this space? Like,
Sure. For me, I do all sorts of different things. You're right. And I'm inspired by just about everything. But winters are long, right? And we spend so much time indoors. And as soon as it gets nice out, I love to be able to be outside. And a lot of my work, I think, is influenced by nature and all the things in my environment. And so a while ago, we built this gazebo, and it just seemed like the perfect thing to do. That board that you can see, I use that for painting on. And so when summer comes, I can paint a little bit more crazily and freely and throw things around. And in the wintertime, I actually bring that board into my porch studio for painting, and I can paint in there on it as well. So it kind of travels back and forth in and out, but I'm always so excited. As soon as it gets nice out, I can't wait to get my board out there and be able to paint outside. And everything works out very well in there. So I have a space at the top. You can see I usually have a piece that I'm working on. And as crazy as it sounds, I just staple big pieces of 4-ply Bristol up, and sometimes it'll rain, things will fall down, and it still manages to stay together. Every once in a while, I've had a huge windstorm that's pulled something off, but I often don't. It takes me more than a day to finish something, so something will be up there for a while, and it'll have layers of maybe spray paint or all sorts of things on it. And it becomes almost like a skin, which is something I kind of like. It becomes this whole new substrate. So I work on the top however I like, and on the bottom, I always have another piece up, and my grandsons come over, and sometimes we'll have some sort of art jams together, right? We'll all work together there, and you just don't have such a big mess to clean up, right? Just hose her all down at the end.
yeah, even the kids. Yeah, hose the kids down.
Absolutely.
No. Well, inspiration comes in. It's great that inspiration can come from young people as well. How their vision of what you're doing, how that responds with them as well. And I think, we talked about that a little bit, how you work with your community, and different things. So this is so what kind of process is going on here? Are you dealing with acrylics and prints? How do you creating these types of images?
Well, this is another one of those things. That's one thing I think lots of people who are mixed media artists, they will go through this as well. You're inspired by something you find, right? The trouble with being a mixed media artist is that everything looks like a possibility, right? Everything looks like, oh, you could do this with it, or you could make that with it. And you get so excited about it. So this one was just bits of scraps that I thought would make really interesting marks. So that's how it started. And you start layering all these different marks. And you're right, it's just acrylic paint, different kinds of mark making, cutting shapes out of different things to create prints with, to make stamps with, seeing what happens if you roll things on it to make different marks. So it's just a layering of different marks that spoke to me at that moment.
Yeah.
I have also lots of times, like everybody else, all artists that kind of have some motifs that they go back to all the time. So this sort of represented a lot of those different things.
Yeah. So you got a little stash. You got a little stash area of your favorite mark making items.
Yeah, sadly, a very large stash.
Well, this one is very reminiscent of it feels like it went through the stamp machine, right? You know how he's got the lines that kind of cross across the top of it there, and sort of feels like it was a stamp, and it just kind of. But I love the colors, nice warm colors, and there's a real nice feeling of. It's difficult to work with round shapes. I know, like they become like little bullseyes, yet they're hollow and they carry the line, they break in and out, and they carry nicely in this. It almost has a celestial feeling of moon phases or sun phases, where sun going up, something going down. So you can read. I love these things because they can read a lot of different things into, I guess, abstracted works there. So are the inspirations coming from nature? Then you're saying like a lot of this stuff that you
A
do.
lot of it. I was thinking that the circles, I don't know, circles show up a lot, and I guess that's part of, that is a very common thing for lots of people. But I love the circular shape, and I like the way it sort of represents wholeness and can be so many different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
The top shapes, I think when I sort of scribed into the stamp that I was using, and it made it look sort of like, oh, it's sort of like roses, right? But I do often have things about moons and circles and things and marks that do that. And I love patterns that repeat. And so, I just happen to repeat those circular shapes 3 times. And then I've got other sort of more muted white circles in the background. So I'm trying to sort of layer and have things go back and forth. So it was just sort of an experiment with those shapes. What else can I do with these shapes? How can I make those shapes speak
Yeah.
different ways? Yeah, just
Yeah.
fun.
Sometimes artists get completely bored with the same shapes, but I love seeing it how they keep pushing and pushing and pushing until they break through and find another level that they weren't at before. Because you have to stay. It's like saying you just paint that glass and you paint it over and over and over again, and pretty soon the glass is not a glass anymore. The glass becomes another thing. Your mind decides it's tired of it being a glass, and it creates something else from it. And it only takes from exhausted work to do that. Like when you push hard that way to say, what can I find more out of that one object? And I think it can happen in landscape and still life as well. But I find I love the discovery in this thing, and I've had a number of different shows this last while, and I can see this a lot of really lovely thing, reeds and a boat and a lot of, like, you can just, the magic comes from when you see a lot of other stuff. You can see new stuff in newer pieces you haven't seen before. And I love that discovery. So the little line shapes that go in that little rosette you said at the top, the rose that was happening, is that just masking an area out and then paint over top of it and pull the pieces off paper or string, or what
Yeah,
is?
the areas at the top, I think actually I might have started this piece out at a retreat when we had limited kind of supplies about. And I think those top circles I had cut out of, like a styrofoam meat tray or something like that. And so then I sort of incised the lines into them so that when I
Oh, I see. Like a
painted
stamp.
it and printed it,
Yeah.
that those pieces didn't show up.
Right.
I think the fun thing about this, like this piece I did quite a while ago, but I was just sort of playing with abstraction a bit and all of these shapes. And I love pattern, as I said, that shows up a lot in my work and sort of was my beginning thing, I think. But most often my work tells a story, my pieces.
Yeah.
And so you play with these shapes until it does start to sort of tell a story to you, right? And so I think that's why I added that sort of moon or boat shape or whatever. And often, pieces like this, I'll turn them different ways. And I always feel like, oh, if it works the several different ways, I think it's done. It's telling a story. It's of its own, right?
Yeah, they can fit it on above a shelf or vertical, whatever you want to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're just going to continue with shapes here. You're dealing
You
with
bet.
round shapes again. We're talking about this circle. And actually, I've seen these in your porch studio, similar ones, right? And they're huge pieces of cardboard. And I don't know of anybody else that really, works on large pieces of cardboard like this. Is they have these nice little square, pristine little 8.5 paper, and they'll do a little watercolor, and you're out cutting and making things out of huge pieces of card. You got a trailer full of cardboard actually when you come. But can you walk us through some of this a little bit?
Absolutely. This is another one of those things that happens. You see a supply and you think, oh, that's really interesting. What could I do with that? Right. So I do some programs with groups of teenagers. I'm part of a program. And so these shapes, when I saw these huge, big cardboards, I just thought, oh, there's got to be something that will happen with these. But I experimented with them for a while. And so what happened was I was actually going to get some newspaper roll-ins, because I always think, you roll up a big piece of paper, you let everybody paint on it, and everybody sort of finds their own way. But these big rolls of newspaper, they come on like huge, huge things. These are about, I don't know, over 3 feet across, I guess, diameter on these. And these are the ends of the rolls of huge, big newspapers when they're put on the printing press. These are the cardboard rolls that go on the ends. And so there were tons of them, and they just get recycled. And I just thought, we got to make stuff with them. And I started using them with the kids, and they just loved them. They loved the idea of it. And for myself, I started experimenting with them, and I would prime them with old house paint and things like that. And then I would drop ink onto them, India ink, and I would roll them around so that the ink would make different shapes and lines and things like that. And I had done that before with big cardboard squares, but it was really fun with the circle to sort of change it up. Yeah. And I liked that idea of, then there was all these shapes, and then I would just paint them all different colors, and it just became sort of a fun thing. So then I started to get a little more, focused on things. So the one with the flower, I just did that, and I put these up in my garden, in my yard, and before the flowers bloom, I've already got some color then.
Yeah.
The other one with the geese on it was just another happenstance thing. We did our retreat out at a hunting place, and there was all of these decoys for goose hunting and duck hunting, and a couple of them were made out of sort of like coroplast, and they were just slotted together. And so I took those flat shapes and would lay them down and trace them, and then we'd trace them over top and color in the shapes again. Just something silly, easy, fun, but very, it becomes like a meditation after a while, doing those kinds of things.
Yeah. I actually was at that retreat. It was really funny because there was like a huge wagon full of these bodies laying in there, like they were to see that many, like these little duck decoys and goose decoys. It was a unique place. Actually did a crazy video too. It was kind of fun. We don't have time to show that today, but there was like, so you've been, let's see what else we got going here. Oh yes, sure. So some more motifs that you were working on, some, I guess, in nature inspired pieces. So, I mean, were you influenced by, Andy Warhol a bit at all in the multiplicity in imagery? Is that something, or is it from somewhere else that you just like this multiple images? Like,
I don't know. Obviously, when Andy Warhol exhibition was in Regina, I did go down to see that because it was just kind of cool to be able to have that opportunity. And I do like that idea of taking an image and seeing how many times you can make it a different way. That is kind of cool. But I really was into using stencils and masks, and some stencils, of course, I made myself, like the birds and things. But the circles, I would cut them, and I would just like trying again with patterns and different things to do. I'm not sure. Andy Warhol, maybe subconsciously, I was thinking about all of that. The one that's on the left, it's called Plantain, with all the patterns in the background. And I like that idea. That sort of has more of an influence. It was definitely influenced by nature, lots of flower motifs and patterns that you'd see in the land, as well. But some of the circles were like packaging that had those shapes in it. And I thought I used those as stencils to see where they would go. And the idea of layering and layering. And the actual plantain image was sort of influenced by the work of Christy Belcourt. Mm-hmm. At that time, we were working with a lot of First Nations things in reconciliation and things like that. And I had referenced her work a lot with the kids I was working with in the B.E.A.T.S program. And we made images sort of based on her work. And that plantain image sort of comes from some of her work. And maybe her work was influencing me because, of course, she has lots of patterning that fashions after beadwork and things, whereas mine is not quite as refined as that. But that's where that sort of shape came from. So I guess I'm influenced, like everyone else, by everything around me and by other artists, the things that they do that speak to me. And I really love the idea of her work and all these natural plants as medicines. And so that was kind of what this was about. It's like there's so much chaos out there, there's so much going on, and that these being in nature is its own medicine, sort of.
Yeah, I'm sorry I just pigeonholed me a little bit with Andy Warhol, but it was more just the multiplicity. And this is completely different than what Andy Warhol looks like, because they're segmented. His pieces are all squared up and gridded, and they're single images that are separated from the next one, but they're multiples as pieces. As in, yours are integrated a lot more, and the background is going in and out of these characters, and it's got a different kind of finish to it than I just find a lot of the Warhols were a little too flat in the pop art sense. They're just pop art. This is not pop art. So this is spontaneous art, is what this is. Like, there's premeditation to it, but you're really thinking on the fly when you work, because the pigment, everything's wet, right? You're wet on wet. You move from one's trying to dry a little bit, but you got an idea to move and you add some more color, and you decide, and it looks like you've maybe pushed fabric and different things into the pigments as well, right? So you're creating these little misty holes that run up the left side of this first piece. That is good. It's very I don't know, it feels very mysterious. It's a very mysterious piece. Well, it is. And just with I guess there's the deep blues and then the warm colors coming forward, and it's it's a low in the plant just sitting there, and I can see how the influences where you got those, they come from. Actually, the other one is influenced. It feels like that as well, and it could be just the nature of the subject matter, I guess, more than anything, kind of the colors.
I think part of the things about those other pieces, lots of times with paint work that I do, I will just find a color that's kind of speaking to me at the moment, and I'll start slapping paint on. So the backgrounds really are just a big mess of color and lines and whatever. And then it's just kind of thinking, oh, like, what is that trying to tell me, right? And so that's sort of how those all start. And then adding the more definite patterns over top starts to pull it together and speak a little bit more.
So do you bounce between like warm and cool colors? Like, do you have days that you're more cool color based, and like whether it's summer or winter, or is it, you ever figured that out? Is that
Well,
part of what you're doing?
Before, most of my work is very much towards warm colors all the time. And so that's part of the other thing. Sometimes you need some real challenges, right? So then I think, well, what color haven't I been using? Well, what haven't I been using? What I better try that. What will happen if I do that? And so that's sort of how I was never really that big on blues that much. And then that's sort of what happened. Is like, okay, you're not using blue. Why not? Why don't I use blue? What happens if I do? That's what happened.
It turns out it's the tube that hasn't been squeezed. That's you have to use that one, because the other ones are all squeezed and there's no paint left. You have to move on. So now you're doing some fabric stuff. I mean, it looks same kind of printing process, but on fabric. Is that what you're doing?
Sort of, yeah. So basically, what sort of started my whole art thing was more, I was in textiles. I actually made clothing and fabric. That was sort of my whole start. And then much later on, through many other things, I started this series of work, which is kind of interesting. This is one of my favorite pieces, and it's kind of crazy. And it was again about the garden, but it was also about stories about my family. And my father was a huge gardener. And so I had done a whole series of work about the plants that he had started in our garden. And I bought the house that my parents used to live in. So there was a lot of sort of heritage plants around and things like that, but also all his old tools were here. And so this was a print of like a hand trowel or a hand rake that I was sort of a sun print that I did on this fabric. And it was sort of speaking to me about how hard he had worked in this yard to create, you know, beauty from nothing when they first bought this property. And so it was kind of interesting for me to do. And then the stitching is again another sort of meditative process to do. And it's one of those things sort of referencing my mother's side of the family and the handwork and things that people did. And my parents were elderly, you know, older parents, even when I was adopted. And so it speaks to all of that. And all of the materials used in this were like an old blanket that had been there, and then an old piece of curtaining or a tea towel that had been there. And so I like incorporating all those old things and how are they going to speak to each other. So that's sort of how that got started. So I did a whole series about all of these pieces.
So is a lot of work on kind of self-discovery? Is this kind of where some of this is coming from? Like, I think artists do that. We not doing it, maybe not even know that they're doing it. Probably
yeah.
Yeah.
I absolutely. I think everything we do is about that, right? Because it's bringing a part of yourself into working with whatever you're working with, right? You're bringing a part of yourself to that and interacting with the materials and everything else. So I think that's definitely part of it. And as I said, you know, you're a mixed media artist. You see possibilities in everything. I mean, it was a raggy piece of stuff, but it just had a cool texture to it. It's like, oh, well, what could happen with this, right? And then, of course, you know, it's only seeing it through the lens of wherever you are at that time. And
The ultimate recycler, reuser.
for sure.
Well, I think that really is, I mean, it's been done before. I mean, Duchamp to, you know, Picasso and such. We're doing early stages of everyday items that were being used within their works. So I think some artists don't, like mixed media artists tend to use that more than say traditional artists, that they may paint an object that is a remembrance that they would have from their past or their family or history. But when you can actually take that object and create a print from it and actually incorporate it into something, it gives it another life. Like it's now reliving again as something else, right? We have a friend sculptor that we know that repurposes iron that he found on the farms, and he makes owls and different things out of them, right? So that iron now has been repurposed into another object that lived on the land as well, but now relives as a different object. So it's kind of a nice analogy that way to think about. I guess communicating, I guess is the word we're using. You know, you're communicating your feelings, your messaging. You know, that this is important enough that I spent some time doing. So
I agree. And I also think that it's part of that thing for myself. It's like we're surrounded with things all of the time that we just take for granted. It's just, so you take something very mundane and utilitarian in one stage of its life, and then you're sort of extracting the beauty from it, or the another story from it, right? It's done its purpose in that way, but now it has a different purpose, right? And sometimes just being interesting is a big enough purpose, you know?
yeah, yeah. We have a joint friend in Bonnie McNabb, and I've always said that she squeezes the life out of plants, and she literally does. It's pretty funny.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So you also do portraits, and I just found this one. I thought I have to play this one, and there's three in this one, on the right, but they're so playful and fun. I love the big hat, and How many of these types of images are they self-portraits in some sense, or are they actual portraits?
No, well, I guess everything maybe is, who knows? I don't know. I just paint them. I just love painting faces. And the big one with the big hat, I have a daughter who's really into fashion, and what happens for me with faces is I will see a picture in a magazine or whatever, and there'll be a certain expression or something about them that I'll really like. So I'll just do like a one continuous line contour drawing of that picture to kind of get the basic expression. And then I like to put it away and then work from just that drawing. What's it trying to tell me, right? So that's the fun in it for me. So my daughter, who was really into fashion, I made a bunch of these ones like that for her, and she had them up in her sewing room where she, would do things, and they were just fun to do. So I usually put lots of collage into the background, all sorts of papers and things, and then, then I do the drawing, and then I just start painting, and they turn into who they turn into.
Yeah. Well, the reason I said self-portraits is because your daughter does look like you. So that is you as far as I'm concerned. I can sit there, I can see your daughter in it as well. But I just love them. I guess this back to this multiplicity of faces of people of color and non-color and male, female, and whatever. It doesn't matter, but they become a beautiful I guess there's messaging here, and I love seeing the facial expressions. I mean, they're a little caricatured, like they're not meant to be realistic paintings, but you can still make out who they are as
Yeah.
a person, and they feel spontaneous and fresh, and they're of the moment, right? And
Very much, yeah. Yeah, and they're not meant to be, well, I guess I think of them, they're playful. These characters were playful. I was thinking about them, like what kind of characters would they be? And they all look like they've got some kind of mischief going on to me. There's
yeah,
something quirky about them to make them interesting to want to draw them.
yeah. No, finding and it's funny, you'd think everybody's face would have some kind of commonality to them, but they don't. Like eye position and mouth and nose and a small little eye gesture or a wrinkle, it changes the face. You think you draw 9 faces there, and at least 1 or 2 should look similar because they're a face, right? We all have eyes and nose and a mouth. They all look different. Like that's the individuality of those things, but each one of those is an expression of that one person, right? And but what happens when you put 9 of them together, and they each are carrying their own baggage, and they're carrying their own knowledge and expression? And now what happens when you put 9 of them together, or 900 of them together? Does that become a community of messaging rather than individual? This is what I've been thinking more about, the multiplicity of things, and saying the context of the meaning in that, right? And saying, as an individual, it stands on its own, but when you put it with 8 other items that are a portrait, what is the conversation? How does the conversation change? Are these communicating amongst each other through your mind? Like, so now because you're looking at them as a group, do they get along? Are they friends? Or is there you can see almost the facial commenting a little bit between them already, right? You can see this smirk and the open mouth gesture and the frown, and and the top left one is hilarious. Like, just love this top left one. She's got that sneer kind of like anyway. I just
It
it's
is kind of fun like that. And as you say, when I put these together, I have this thing about 9 patches. I don't know. That references back to all sorts of earlier work when I had other things put together in this format. But of course, I do tons of these. So there was lots and lots of these pictures to choose from. And so when we were doing an exhibition about a specific theme, I was thinking how these guys kind of reminded me like circus characters almost. They looked like they were all some some kind of performer. They had something going on. And so then I pulled out all of my drawings of this size. I think these are about, I don't know, maybe 14 by 12 or something like that. They're just ripped up papers. And so when I pulled them all out, it was exactly that, laying them out and saying, which one's speaking to which one fits in with this group, which guy looks, it was just kind of that craziness. And then of course, color, how are they going to work together so that it makes an interesting pattern of them all together. But it was fun. And it was about that, right? What kind of conversation would these characters, these performers be having with each other?
Yeah. So I'd say, let's just take a mind thing for a moment. You get 9 images like that, and then you give it a question. And maybe the question would be, what do you think of the Barbie movie? Now look at those faces with that question in your mind, right? And you know that one on the top left just goes, ooh, like really? Yeah.
The other one's saying it was the best thing ever. And yeah.
Well, this is what's fun about it, right? You think, how do you create a new conversation? And you said you can trigger it with a question, an actual physical question, and it would change relative to. So I see that the top left one could be a dominant with that question. With a different question, another one would take the lead, right? It's just kind of a fun thing.
Absolutely. And I think that's the fun thing about art. It doesn't even matter what kind of art it is. It's like anybody who looks at it is looking at it and thinking, from their own perspective, what it's about. And so they will create their own stories and their own, ideas about it. And I love that. That to me is really interesting.
Yeah. If everybody just liked the one same image all the time, what a boring world that would be. We'd all be starving artists because only one guy'd be making a living. He'd be really tired, but that person would be. But yeah, if all you ever did was that, and I guess part of that comes from your upbringing and knowledge and what you've bumped around in your life as to what you like, right?
Yeah, for sure. Oh my goodness, you've pulled out some really interesting things from.
I found stuff on you. Boy, did I ever. Yeah, it's nice that it surprised you a little bit with some.
Absolutely, yeah.
These are a little bit older pieces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What you're doing. Can you take us back as to where this started and what some of this mean?
All right. Okay, these are two, these were done similar at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And the context was, at that time, I was exploring stories and about my family. And I had done, I was preparing for an exhibition that I did about my story. It was called Fragmented Stories. And it was about how, I don't know how everybody else's family worked, but in my family, there wasn't a lot of photographs about people. But the ones that I had, I would make up stories about them. And you only would have the story version that you had heard from one of your relatives, or that you sort of made up on your own. But there was only those few stories about a few pictures. And it's such a tiny wee bit about any one life, right? So people's lives are so much bigger and fuller, and all you've got is a little story about this bit, a little story about that. And I thought that was really curious. And so that sort of led to the idea about books. Books about their life is bigger. It's more like a book of stories, but I don't know what those stories are. So the one on the right with the little girl on it is actually a picture of my mother when she was young. And I believe that book sort of opens up and there's some another picture of her, maybe one or something about that age, that era that, she was born in, which is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. The picture on the other side with the nest was when I was thinking about, because I was adopted, I didn't know at that time who my birth parents were. And so I always had this great idea that anyone could be a relative. And so the idea that anybody I met, or all these old pictures I looked at, they could be like I felt like I could maybe be part of a gypsy clan, and that could be my real family, and wouldn't that be exciting, right? And so that's what these are about, and sort of they contain all these stories about what could be, right? What those
Very,
people
very
were really
fantastical.
about.
Yeah, it's very fantastical. I think children go through those kinds of things too. Like they'll fantasize about things, and that's where the magic comes from. What kind of works people create by their legitimate ideas, like the fantasy. It's not, and you find vehicles to communicate that with. And the book is a beautiful thing. So was this initially a real book, and then you carve it back and?
Absolutely. My parents were both really big readers. And of course, when you're clearing out their things, you're going through all of this stuff. And books are just such wonderful things, right? But these are actually, Reader's Digest condensed version things, and they're the perfect size. And it's the same thing. It's like, oh my God, there's all of these here. What great material. What can I do with them, right? And so I like that idea of turning them into something more meaningful to me. Not that the books and the stories, things weren't meaningful, but the books represented my parents and their love of reading and learning. And so there's all sorts of different things being combined.
Yeah, and a book is very comforting. Like it really is. You can pick it up anytime. It's there.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that was part of that thing about the size of these books, right? Because they're very much that way, and they're very contained, and they're a comfortable size to hold, right? And yeah.
We're really mixing it up here. I got
You
some of
certainly are.
So you got some of your, I guess, an installation piece. I guess as we're talking a little about installations, because you're a mixed media artist. So and we've got basically a blow up of the image. I couldn't, because of the long vertical nature of this piece.
Yes, I'm sorry. As you can see, I do lots of long vertical. I don't know why I'm really taken with that.
Yeah.
Another friend of mine, Brian Ring, did a bunch of pieces in long verticals, and I think they just spoke to me, that shape. Kind of ran with it.
Yeah. So can you walk us through this piece a little bit? What's happening
Sure,
here?
sure. It's kind of a combination of all sorts of things, because that image of that silhouette, it was part of that whole idea about the stories, and only a few pictures and all the stories that conjured up. So way back, there was this picture I found. I've blown it up here, of my mother. It says Dot at 18. And when I was doing this show about my family and all the little bits of stories I knew about it, I found that photo and I love the silhouette of it. So I blew it up in different sizes, and I used it as a mask, and I'd use it as a stencil. And so I did tons of pieces of this, like literally tons. It shows up in a billion different artworks. And this piece was done for the Fiber Art Network, which was a Western Canadian textile group. And they did a call for entry for a show called Ekphrastic. And it was kind of cool. What they did was, one of the women's sisters owned a publishing company. And so they were going to publish poems. But before any of these poems were published, we collaborated and we chose a poem of these Canadian women poets, and did a piece to represent what that poem meant to us. And then it was all going to be displayed together in a show. And so the piece that I picked was called Turn, Turn, Turn. So this piece is actually based on a triangle at the top and folds together. And there's 3 transparent panels that have this silhouette of my mother, and then some silk screened areas of some writing my father had done in a letter to her at one point. It's referencing all of the history for them, all of that. And so the piece could spiral around and turn. And the poem itself was a lovely poem. I feel feel I must say who did the poem. It was by Tracy Hammond. And so that was part of that piece. And I think on Blurb, they put together a book where you could actually go through it. So these pieces traveled around for a couple of years through the Fiber Art Network. But that was how that came about. And again, just reusing the same imagery and ideas and continuously reinterpreting them.
It's nice that people can see that. You can reuse images. You don't have to have a fresh one every time. And color and silhouette and different things change up. Put 2 or 3 together that says different than a single, and they're big or small. And because a lot of things are about scale. Really,
absolutely, yeah.
Scale is a very big influencer. I'll just see what else we got here. We're bouncing around a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This is kind of fun. So which one would you like me to talk about first?
Yeah, the first one. I'm assuming that's your mother again on the left?
Actually not. That's kind of crazy. Yeah. Wow. So the one with the sort of frame piece at the top, I did a show together with another artist who is a potter, Rosemary Stadnick, another local artist. She and I did a show together. And these are some pictures, I believe, of, I think, maybe her mother and one of their things. So because I was working a lot at that time with older pictures. And so we did a piece together. She'd had pottery pieces, and I had two-dimensional pieces that we worked on together. So this was about the past, and there's a recipe book referenced in the back about home canning, and there's a canning lid on there, and then these different images on top.
Yeah. It also has a reference to house a little bit. Yes,
absolutely. Right? And I did a lot of house format pieces as well. That whole idea of home and past and all of that was a big influence for a while. Still is.
Well, I think that's about where we are, right there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, again, I did lots and lots of those pieces with sort of a house shape, and lots of, I was really taken with things from the past and reusing things from the past. That was sort of another challenge, right? What can I do with what I have? And because I was really enamored with old photographs, because the expressions and, each picture seems to tell such a different story, right? Yeah. So that kind of thing shows up lots, and I like to just keep putting them in. So this is fun for me to revisit all these old pieces.
I even like the picture hanger a little bit on the first one. It still has that roof referencing of home. So it's lovely to see all these collage things together, and people use the stuff you've got. That's what it's all about. And I really appreciate you showing your stuff and talking about your work today. It was a joy. We have a closing coming up here shortly, and then we'll
close. Yeah, there you go. I have to come in and always say goodbye. So it's just the way it works. I don't know. So anyway, thank you so much. I can't wait for the next show because I know what's coming, because I've seen the preview of the Crankies. So that's going to be, I think, huge. But thank you for your time, and we'll stay with us after the credits, and we'll see you shortly.
You bet. Thanks.